Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's edition of Advocacy Talks with Vision Ireland. I'm delighted to have you all joining us today, and we have a very interesting guest that I'm going to introduce you to in a moment. But before I do that, I just wanted to remind you all that this event is being recorded. So if you do want to listen back at a future time to anything you might have missed, you will find it on the Vision Ireland YouTube channel, and you can also find it through our website, which is www.vi.ie. So, just to remember that's there. There are loads of resources that you can access through our website, and also previous talks from the Advocacy Talks team that are on the YouTube channel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you today to Antoine Fobe, who is the head of advocacy and campaigning with the European Blind Union. So welcome, Antoine.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. Hello, everybody.
You're very welcome. And I think, Antoine, you're joining us from Paris today, is that right?
Correct, where EBU has its premises.
Absolutely. I didn't realize that's where the head office was for the EBU. So that's fantastic. So I would like to start off really by just asking you to give us a little bit of an overview of the European Blind Union and what it does.
Well, the European Blind Union, EBU in short, is a not-for-profit organization that represents the interests of blind and partially sighted people throughout Europe. It counts 42 member organizations, one per country, including all EU countries minus one, that is Malta. And of course, Vision Ireland is our Irish member. We have a vision. I suppose it's largely the same, if not entirely the same as Vision Ireland. Our vision is an inclusive society, an accessible and inclusive society, allowing all persons with visual impairment to have independent and fulfilling lives. And our mission is to bring, of course, that vision, the reality closer to that vision. And for that, we advocate for legislation and policy changes. We raise awareness and sensitize the larger public beyond decision makers. And of course, we offer support to our members. You were surprised, Madeleine, that our premises are in Paris. That is because we are not specifically connected to the EU, because our membership is larger. So because we reach out to wider Europe, our membership corresponds rather to the Council of Europe. In fact, I would say 90% of our work really relates to the European Union for one practical reason, is that the European Union is very proactive on social and disability issues in particular. And therefore, that's where the work is being done, and we have to accompany that work. For instance, the European Union has a disability rights strategy. We have to be present and respond, and it takes a lot of our time to engage on that. And this being said, when you work on the EU, you actually also relate to wider Europe, because the EU policy and legislation has a wider impact, if only because of the European Economic Area, because of accession countries that want to connect more to the concerns of the European Union, and because of the EU neighborhood policy. So it makes perfect sense to engage a lot with the European Union.
That's interesting, because it just goes to the fact we always think about, because we're members of the EU, the European Union, that we kind of forget that, that there's wider Europe, that there are countries that aren't members of that. So excuse my ignorance, but the European Council, that's representing Europe as a whole, including those countries that aren't in the European Union. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it works. It is focused on fundamental rights, which is perfectly relevant, I think, for our work. But in fact, the Council of Europe does not, and by far not, have the same means, financial resources, human resources as the European Union, and it isn't very active on disability issues. It's much more difficult to engage with them, also to obtain funding. an organization like EBU has a large part of its resources, financial resources, coming from the EU institutions, from the EU, and that makes a difference. So we really need to engage with the EU, if only for financial reasons.
Yeah. So would the funding then come from the members in the main?
I don't have the exact proportions, but the two main chunks of our budget are membership fees and funding from the European Commission in reverse order.
Okay.
And then there are occasional funding per project, but I won't enter into that here.
No, that's fine. It was just to have a general idea of that. So you were saying the members of the EBU are the kind of national bodies, is that right? So it's like in Ireland, it's Vision Island, and in the UK, it would be the RNIB.
Yes, as a rule, EBU has only one member organization per country, and where there are more members that want to be our member, then they connect to EBU as a federation.
Okay, so they just then would have one person representing it, or one organization, if you like, representing from the whole country, rather
That's
than
correct.
Several. Okay, no, that makes sense, to have a coordinated approach, really, and you. Yeah, you know, the more members you have, the more complicated it can get to coordinate anything, can't it, really, with anything? That's fantastic. And how long has the EBU been in operation, Antoine?
We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, so 1984.
Wow, that's amazing. I guess there's been a lot of changes in that time since the foundation of it.
Well, I started working with EBU in 2018, so 6 years ago, precisely. And even in 6 years, I've seen a change, because the position I occupy was a newly created position then. So there wasn't a person in charge of advocacy and campaigning specifically at EBU, at the EBU Secretariat, when I started. And there was, when I started, I was part of a staff of 5 people. Today, we are 7. We've recruited in the meantime a person in charge of external communications and someone in charge of relationship with the members.
Brilliant. Oh, that's great to hear that it is expanding, because it is such a vital role that you're fulfilling there. I mean, coming to that, it would be really interesting to hear about some of the kind of campaigns that you've undertaken in the past, and and what difference they might have practically meant to people in Ireland and around Europe.
Okay, with pleasure. Well, some campaigns that come to my mind are the following. The Marrakesh Treaty campaign. For those who are not familiar with the Marrakesh Treaty, it is the treaty that facilitates the production and the access to accessible format books and works in general, without having to pay, as an exception to author rights. So it's a treaty that was adopted within the remit of the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is very original in itself. And it is a result actually of a worldwide campaign of the World Blind Union, in which EBU participated very actively at the European level to promote this treaty. Based on the idea that the observation that there was what we called then a book famine for visually impaired people, because there weren't enough accessible format copies of works out there. And that treaty was a huge success. It was rather quickly adopted, but more interesting even, it was very quickly signed and ratified by very many countries, I think hitting a record in terms of entry into force. And now, of course, the campaign is over in the sense that we don't really need to promote the treaty anymore, but at least we are following, monitoring its proper implementation in Europe, at least.
Absolutely, and I know our members here will be aware of that, because obviously for us it would be under I think it's Bookshare, that would be the platform where they can access sort of the accessible books, and our library service in Vision Island would manage that. So it is an amazing service, as you say, that people have access to just this huge now range of books in, I think it's, isn't it, the different sort of formats would be the easy reader ebooks, or easy reader I think is the app that we use to use it, but it's Bookshare. It's all quite technologically confusing.
It's interesting that you mention ebooks, Madeleine, because one of the issues we still have about the Marrakesh Treaty, its implementation in the European Union, is that you may be aware there has been a European Accessibility Act, and that's also a result of one of our major campaigns. Now that European Accessibility Act also covers ebooks. And publishers, the European Publishers Lobby is trying to convey the idea to the EU institutions that the Marrakesh Treaty has lost relevance precisely because by 2025, June 2025, ebooks will have to be accessible, those put on the market. Now, in our view, it doesn't make the Marrakesh Treaty relevant because ebooks are just one of the formats that may be convenient for people with visual impairment. We strongly defend the idea that people should be allowed to choose their preferred format, which may be Braille, which will be DAISY or audiobooks. And once same person might actually have different preferred formats depending on the type of use and work. So that's an important issue today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I hadn't considered that, but I think it's vital that we maintain the need for it. Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
Would you like me to continue with other campaigns?
Yes, please. Sorry, I do. That would be lovely.
So another one was the European Accessibility Act. That was also a success, but with a minus aspect. We tend to think that the European Accessibility Act is not as horizontal as it should be. It covers a lot of products and services, but mainly in the digital area, not so much in the real world. So I'll mention that again maybe later when I talk about future issues. We were also very vocal in a specific campaign about making payment terminals accessible, and our success there was that payment terminals were immediately taken into the European Accessibility Act, whereas they weren't contemplated initially. Today we are working on promoting recommendations as to how concretely to make payment terminals accessible for visually impaired people. I would also like to mention our Silent Cars campaign, which is a campaign to promote an acoustic system for vehicles who are electric or hybrid, precisely to allow blind people as pedestrians to hear a car coming at low speed in the cities. And that acoustic system called AVAS is now compulsory for car makers. And we still have issues about when AVAS, concrete at what speed level and with what noise and what type of noise AVAS needs to be activated. But those are, this is fine tuning. But the principle that silent cars should produce some sort of noise for people who can't see them coming, that battle has been won. And the last point I'll mention, Nazca, is just to say that sometimes we have campaigns that are project driven. I would like to mention our campaign for accessible elections, because it was based on a project called AVA, Awareness Raising on Accessible Voting, which produced sort of recommendations to make voting accessible. And now we are using that material to promote accessible elections at European level. I could tell you why at European level in particular, in European elections, but that's the angle we have taken.
Oh, there's a lot there, isn't there, Antoine? You've been very busy, and they are all sort of issues that I know that our service users will be delighted to hear. I mean, you've gone back there to the European Accessibility Act and the inclusion of the ATM machines, I think was what you were referring to there, wasn't it? For accessing cash, and I know that is a hot topic at the moment amongst our service users. The fact that they're not accessible at the moment. So the fact that that will be covered under the European Accessibility Act is very welcome news. I know we all want it now, and I know it's 2025, which isn't actually that far away now, but I think that can be one of the things, isn't it? The things do take time, even when you have a success, which it is a huge success to have got that act passed. The rollout of it will probably be quite slow, would you think, in terms of the implementation from ensuring that institutions do actually, make their services accessible?
Well, speaking of the EU in general, it usually takes about 2 years to promote an initiative for legislation. Then when the train starts, the legislative train starts, from the moment the Commission starts preparing a proposal and a new act is eventually adopted, count in average 2 more years. Then there's the delay of entry into force. If it's a regulation, that could take another year. If it's a directive, because it needs to be implemented in turn in national legislation, consider another 2 years. And then there may be an implementation deadline that could take up to 1 year or more. So that explains the timeline between the adoption of the European Accessibility Act, which dates back 2021, if I remember correctly, and the fact that it will translate materially in 2025.
And 25, yeah. So it's just a huge lot of, as you say, process to go through before it's actually, in legislation in the various countries. So you can see why that is. And then I guess the question is of how will individual countries enforce that, in the sense that monitoring that businesses are actually making their services accessible. Do you know how that might look?
But to be frank, Madeleine, that is by far the most complicated part of our work. EBUs, Vision Ireland's, etc. I mean, we know what the issues are, we know what the problems are, and what we are asking for. We largely know how to promote how to convey, voice our concerns. And how to promote legislation. But when it comes to monitoring how the legislation is, if it is respected concretely, that often requires resources at least EBU does not have. We would rely on our members. And I suspect that most of our members would find it very difficult to actually monitor concretely. Take, for instance, the Web Accessibility Directive. Yeah. It's a huge thing. Public sector websites and applications need to be accessible. How do you go about monitoring that? What you can realize is that concretely there are still a lot of websites that are not accessible. But if you want to quantify systematically, it's huge work. It's beyond the capacity of NGOs very largely.
Absolutely. I know we have here our sort of partner company here, IA Labs, who is, part of their work is to try and monitor, these websites to sort of do these audits to see that whether they are accessible or not. But it's trying to then get, I suppose, government to, what is the mechanism? I know this is probably an individual countries, maybe do they approach it in different ways as to how they ensure that it's being implemented, or what is the consequences of not implementing, in terms of fines or whatever. But yeah, I mean that is the key, isn't it? Making sure that things are being done when they're meant to be.
Absolutely, and what Vision Ireland with its lab is doing is fantastic. It's rather an exception, I think, in the European scene, and it's very necessary and important work. So congratulations for that.
Oh no, thank you. I know they're very proud to have them doing that great work. It does make a huge difference, absolutely. But yeah, no, the other things you were talking about there, to just move on, the the elections again. We've got elections coming up, local elections in June, and I know that people will be delighted to hear that that is an area that the EBU has been looking into and working on, because as you say, the right for people to be able to vote independently and in private and secret is so important, and to have the ability to use whatever format works for them. We have an issue here because we're proportional representation, and one of the issues is that sometimes the ballot papers can just be so long, because there could be so many candidates for any election. So it does pose challenges in how to make that accessible. But I mean, where there's a will, there's a way. So I think it's great to hear that that's something that the EBU is involved in as well.
Let me tell you why we took the angle of promoting. Well, we're essentially asking for European Parliament elections, which are coming up in June, to be accessible. The reason why we do this is that member states retain full sovereignty to organize their own national, regional, local elections, and there's nothing the EU can say about that. Yeah. But when it comes to European Parliament elections, the EU can say something. And if we manage to have European elections be made accessible for visually impaired voters, that will necessarily have what we call a spillover effect. Because since European elections are indeed European elections, but they are still organized separately in each country according to their own traditions and procedures and habits. Now, if European elections have to be accessible, indirectly, that means that the good practices will have a spillover effect on national, municipal, regional elections.
Absolutely.
So there's a strategy there.
No, that makes total sense, because here the European elections are happening at the same time as our local elections. So from a practical point of view, it would make sense that you'd have the same system in place for both. So as you say, if the European election is accessible, that the local elections would be too. So it's a really good strategy, I think, to take on that. Yeah, no, well, moving on, I guess, to sort of thinking about what's happening currently. You've done a lot of work there that's happened, but what projects are you working on at the moment, Antoine?
Well, our big issues, I'll just mention them and let me know if you want to go more in depth on some aspects, but I'll just a list of those hot issues for us right now. The disability card, the disability parking card, the European disability card, European parking card for persons with disabilities, proposed directive at EU level. That is important. It's been adopted, almost adopted now. The text is agreed, so it's just a done deal. It's just a matter of time before it is formally adopted. But there are big issues there. The reform of the EU electoral code, which I mentioned, promoting audio description and audio subtitling in films through the EU using its the leverage of funding through the Creative Europe Media Program. Promoting data at EU level that is disaggregated by type of disability. There is a lot of data on disability in general. But when it comes to, for instance, visual impairment specific data, all that you would have is a split by types of functional limitations. How many people in Europe have visual functional limitations? But if you enter into the details of how many people with a visual impairment are employed, in average, how much less are they paid for the same work, etc., or access to education, you don't have data disaggregated by type of data disaggregated by type of disability. And I think this is a big gap when it comes to informed policy making, legislation, and all that. So we are lobbying the EU to get its act together, because with the help of member states, because member states are very much needed to provide that data at European level. Another strong, important issue for us is what we label as the disability benefits trap. The fact that in some European countries, if you enter paid employment, you lose your disability benefits, which is lack of consideration of the fact that people with disabilities have a more expensive life in general, and disability benefits are there for that. And in by no way disability benefits should maintain them excluded from the work, the job market. And to mention one last point, it's Braille literacy. We always find it very important in a context where you have more and more digital tools to assist people with visual impairment, to say, don't forget Braille literacy. It's not because you can have audio description, because you can use a smartphone that will do a lot of things for you, that you still don't need to be Braille literate, because Braille literacy actually brings more qualitative education and inclusion, especially in the area of sciences, mathematics, etc., etc. So there is a tendency to say Braille is not very necessary anymore, including within the disability community. Some visually impaired people tend, especially the younger people, tend to neglect Braille, and we want to defend it at European level and to say by no means don't. What I mentioned about the Marrakesh Treaty, the European Accessibility Act, and ebooks. Yes, ebooks are good, but they're not the only solution, and some people will want to have the possibility to use Braille too.
Wow, there's a lot there, isn't there, Antoine? There's so many things that are just so important. And I just talking on the last one, the Braille. Yeah, I mean, I learnt Braille as a child, and don't use it anymore. Luckily, I do have enough vision to read sort of large print and things. But it is so important, I think, because we can rely too much. Not, different people have different preferences, but to be able to have that access to Braille, to I guess. It's a different way of being independent. An audiobook is fantastic and I love them, but reading in Braille, you're reading it yourself, which I think is a very different maybe experience, I think. And for people to have that option, I think it is very important. I don't know, I think maybe there's a bit of a, you might think to teach children who are born with vision impairments Braille, but is it less likely to teach somebody who loses their sight as an older person? Is there a perception that it's not as easy or not possible to learn Braille when you get older, or would you think that might be?
It makes sense to think that it's more difficult to learn Braille. For instance, if you become blind later on in your life, of course. But it's the reason we have this battle right now is, for instance, the issue came very visibly when we were promoting accessibility to lifts for visually impaired people. There was a sort of an obligation to make that aspect of the built environment visible, and we were associated to work in the EU standardization bodies in a working group on how to make lifts accessible. And it struck us that basically each time we mentioned Braille, people, especially the industry, and including people who were not connected to the industry, because of course they are also looking for easy solutions and avoid complications, but they would tell us, well, is Braille really necessary? I mean, as long as if there's a vocal message, if there is something raised characters, that should be sufficient. Well, it's Braille literacy. If you don't actually see Braille in your daily life, see or experience it, then you lose the habit of using it, and it doesn't have. It's detrimental. It undermines the importance of Braille as a whole. And you have to motivate people to want to learn Braille, because it's actually much more than the practicalities of daily life. It's also how you structure your intelligence, your knowledge, your learning, and that's why we want to defend it.
And I think another point that springs to mind is that there's a uniformity to Braille. There's the 6 characters and they have a set format, whereas if you're just relying on characters, printed numbers or whatever on a lift being tactile, in different situations they could be different in terms of the size of them, or there's not a uniformity necessarily to that, whereas the Braille characters, it has a standard size and a standard format, so that makes sense.
It's true.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to mention, Madeleine, is that about looking at the future. Again, European elections coming up now. We're not interested only about the European elections in the electoral process itself. European elections means a new parliament, of course, but also resulting from that afterwards, a new European Commission with new portfolios, a new, we hope, visibility of the disability agenda within those institutions. So looking at the next 5 years, this is a moment where we can actually make a statement of what we expect from the EU in the next 5 years. So we have produced a statement with our key issues for the next 5 years, and we will have next month a communications campaign also to flag those key issues. And when the new institutions will be in place and organized, so towards the end of this year, we will actually make in contact with the new commissioner, competent commissioners, the new key MEPs, and we will be sort of introducing ourselves again to some new faces about what our issues are, what we stand for, and what we expect from them in the coming years.
Fantastic. So exciting time ahead. And just thinking about that, how do you sort of go about coming up with that program of works that you want to do in terms of engagement with the members of the EBU, like Vision Island or RNIB, how do they feed into that?
Well, I'll give you a general answer. It doesn't relate specifically to Vision Ireland. One challenge we have as an organization, I think I can say this even publicly because it's an issue, a challenge that every federation faces. We want to represent the interests of our members in Europe with the European institutions, with the EU in particular. But in order to do that, if you want to be efficient in EU lobbying, you need to act at EU level in Brussels or in Strasbourg, but you also need, and here we need our members, you need to also lobby the national capitals. That's because one of the key elements, one of the key institutions of the EU arena are, but you have the European Parliament, you have the European Commission, but very, very strong, very important is the Council, the EU Council, which is composed of the ministers of the 27 member states. Now, if the member states are not wanting to carry a reform or to adopt legislation proposed by the Commission, even if endorsed by the European Parliament, it's not going to happen. So lobbying the EU is also done by our national, should also be done by our members nationally in contact with their members. And here our challenge, our difficulty is that we have some national member organizations that are very active on European affairs, others much less. And that's our challenge, to sort of mobilize our members when necessary.
Yes, to get us involved, get us campaigning, as you say, at our end to kind of feed into the bigger picture. And presumably with that in mind, getting the voices and kind of lived experience from our service users would hugely kind of be helpful to feed into that too, as always with any of these campaigns.
Something that is very nice, very promising, is that we have a new governance since our last General Assembly earlier this year. And we have, as a result, younger people more interested in European affairs, also in the technicalities of the issues related to new information technologies. And this is promising for the future. And I'd like to mention in particular for Ireland, we have Kevin Kelly from Vision Ireland as our second vice president. And other people also relatively young compared to the previous governance. And I think it's promising for the dynamism of EBU as a whole.
Absolutely, it's so important to get that new blood coming in and new ideas, and as well as obviously we don't want to lose the older people as well, because of huge experience and knowledge that they would have. But it's great to see a renewal happening as well. I think that is so important. Just on another note, Antoine, what got you involved in the first place? Just little bit about you, really, and how did you get involved in this whole EBU yourself?
I think it was quite logical, even if it came by chance. Well, I've always been involved in EU public affairs. Myself, I'm a lawyer by training and specialized in EU law. But I came to EBU for two reasons. One was that I was looking for a job in Paris, where I was already, and but in EU affairs there weren't that many, and the fact that EBU was recruiting for this position was an opportunity, of course. But I also related to the cause of EBU because my late grandfather was blind, and I was very fond of him. I admired him a lot. So the cause, there was a sort of homage to starting to work with EBU. But more deeply, actually, ever since I started my career in 1992. And at the very first year, I worked with the European Commission, which was what I thought I wanted to do my whole career, work within the EU institutions. And very soon I realized that I actually preferred engaging with the EU institutions from outside in a lobbying advocacy capacity. And I've always done it with NGOs, representing a strong public interest, especially civil liberties and fundamental rights. So I've worked for organizations such as European Citizens Action Services, which promotes EU citizenship, with Amnesty International, especially on EU affairs, with the Council of Bars and Law Societies on the right to a fair trial and cooperation in judicial matters at the European level, and with the Data Protection Authority for the protection of data privacy. So it's quite logical for me to have come to EBU because it was always also about promoting a certain vision of Europe, social Europe, a Europe of values. And of course, here it's all about promoting the UN CRPD in Europe and its concrete implementation.
Wow, it's an amazing amount of experience you've got there, Antoine, and we're certainly very grateful to have you representing, our community there in the EBU. It's amazing, and it just has been fascinating to hear the sort of breadth of the work that you've been involved with, and the practical impact that's had. That really has. You can see how those campaigns, have made a practical difference in people's lives, and that the future campaigns that you were talking about, and how they will as well. And I just, really do hope that we can encourage, as you say, more of the national bodies to take more of an active role and, mobilize their members to really get involved in all of that campaigning, because, as you say, what can be achieved is fantastic. With that in mind, I suppose it would be really interesting to sort of know, how can our members kind of keep abreast of what's going on in the EBU in terms of your website and social media and things like that?
Okay. Well, our website is euroblind.org. Through our website, you can access the publications and resources sections, which in turn would lead us to our newsletter, which is a monthly newsletter with different angles. One is campaigning, in short for advocacy and campaigning. In that newsletter, for instance, each month I report on the lobbying activities, campaigning activities of the month. We also have a quarterly thematic newsletter, which we call Focus, and a monthly podcast, also with a specific thematic angle, and interviews of stakeholders, members, governance, or people from outside EBU, but with whom we are engaging. On our website, you can find our position papers, our statements, our press releases. On the campaigns and activities section of our website, You can learn about those in particular also, but also about projects we are engaged in or have been engaged in the past. For the moment, for instance, one project we are undertaking is participating in promoting an accessible euro coins and bills. It's something we are in contact with the European Central Bank about. And there are also discussions about the future, what they call the digital euro. This is still pretty new, so it's difficult for me to talk about it, but it's in the making and we're being consulted about that. In general, we're very present on the social media. So you can find us on Facebook with the name EBU, on LinkedIn, the X Twitter, with the name Euroblind. So do follow us there if you want to see what is happening. By the way, I mentioned our newsletter. It's been sent proactively to all our members every month. But if you want to catch up, it's all available, also past editions on our website, as I said.
That's brilliant.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And just to repeat, the website is euroblind.eu, is it?
.org. Euroblind.org.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm just confusing people there.
If you wonder, and if your auditors wonder why Euroblind, which is the name isn't very catchy. It sounds a little bit like you're blind to the EU. Personally, I'm not. But the fact is, there is another EBU who unfortunately is more famous than us. It's the European Broadcasting Union, which organizes the Eurovision Song Contest, among many other activities. So EBU is a name that was already taken. So on social media, we had to use Euroblind.
Oh, it's very frustrating, isn't it? I tell you, the singers got there first. That's something that Ireland would be very interested in as well. The Eurovision, not doing so well in the last number of years, unfortunately, but it had a good spell for a while back. Didn't
I know, indeed.
Oh dear. Oh well, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Antoine. I mean, is there anything else do you think that you'd like to add to all that information? I think we've covered a lot of things there.
I think we've covered it, really. I don't feel any frustration of things I would have liked to say and couldn't say, but I would like to thank you again for your interest toward EBU and for inviting me. It's been a pleasure talking with you and with your auditors. And don't hesitate to contact me again if there are any questions or follow-up questions.
Oh, that's fantastic, Antoine. Thank you so much. It's been a delight to have you on our podcast today. And as I say, for anybody watching or listening, you can catch it again on our YouTube channel or through our website at www.vi.ie. So look forward to catching up with you all next month. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.